Was Joseph Smith pointing toward more than was fully established? Lyman Wight, Doctrine and Covenants 124, in a respectful exploration of unfinished restoration themes, Lyman Wight was not a fringe voice standing outside early Mormonism. He was an early convert, ordained a high priest in 1831, later a member of the Quorum of the 12 in 1841, and also a participant in the Council of 50. That matters, because when a man with that level of proximity speaks about temple failure, rejection, and unfinished Zion, his words cannot be dismissed as the grumbling of a distant critic. They come from someone who stood close enough to Joseph Smith to understand the seriousness of what Nauvoo was supposed to become. Now look at the revelation itself. Doctrine and Covenants 124 does not offer unconditional security. It commands the saints to build a house to the Lord's name for the Most High to dwell therein, and then explains why there was not yet a place found on earth where he could come and restore again that which was lost unto you, or which he hath taken away, even the fullness of the priesthood. It then warns that if they did not do the things appointed within the allotted time, they would be rejected as a church, with your dead, and that after sufficient time to build that house, baptisms for the dead could no longer be acceptable outside that order. B. That is not ornamental language. That is covenant jeopardy written into the text of the revelation itself. This is where Lyman Wight becomes so important. Joseph Smith Papers preserves White's later interpretation of Joseph Smith's October 1841 declaration about baptisms for the dead. Wight said he understood it to mean that the time for building the temple had passed by, and both we and our dead were rejected together. C. That is a brutal statement. It means Wight was not treating Doctrine and Covenants 124 as a hollow threat or as rhetorical scenery. He was reading the warning as something that had actually taken effect. Later historical scholarship tied to White's own journal preserves even harsher language. There he is quoted as saying, "The church now stands rejected together with their dead." The church being rejected now stands alienated from her God in every sense of the word. The same source says he then asked, "This being the case, what should now be done?" D. That is not the language of institutional reassurance. That is the language of a man who believed the body had crossed into covenant failure. This is exactly where easy triumphilist narratives begin to crack. Many assume that because the institution survived, the warning could not have fallen. But survival is not the same as acceptance. Offices can continue. Administration can continue. Quorums can continue. Public growth can continue. And yet a covenant people can still stand under judgment if they have not fulfilled what the Lord required. B. Doctrine and Covenants 124 leaves that possibility standing in plain view, and Wight appears to have believed it became reality. C. D. To be precise, White's own proposed remedy was not simply an undefined future band of servants. The same historical study says he opposed succession outside Joseph Smith's own posterity and looked to the fruit of his loins as the proper continuation. E. It also says he lamented that otherwise the church did not move onward to the final redemption of Zion and the building of the great temple therein. F. So his solution was more specific than a general servant theology. But the larger point still stands. Wight clearly believed the work Joseph began had not reached its intended order, and that Zion's fuller redemption still lay ahead. That is what makes Wight so uncomfortable for settled assumptions. He raises the possibility that beginning a restoration is not the same as completing it. Receiving commandments is not the same as fulfilling them. Possessing priesthood offices in one sense is not necessarily the same as entering the order where what was lost is restored. D. Again, even the fullness of the priesthood. B. White's witness does not prove every later claimant or every self-appointed reformer. But it does shatter the lazy assumption that historical continuity alone proves that the saints arrived where Joseph Smith was trying to take them. So the real issue is not whether God began a restoration through Joseph Smith. The real issue is whether men have mistaken a beginning for a completion. Doctrine and Covenants 124 warns of rejection with the dead. Lyman Wight later spoke as though that rejection had indeed taken place. B, C, D. If he was even partly right, then the boastful cry that all is well is not faith. It is presumption. The more serious question is whether Zion, temple fullness, and the intended order of the restoration still await the Lord's own completion in his time. P. Footnotes/source links. A. Lyman Wight biography and office as Joseph Smith Papers. Lyman Wight. Joseph Smith Papers. Lyman Wight testimony bio details. B. Doctrine and Covenants 124 language about the house. Restore again. Fullness of the priesthood, and rejected as a church, with your dead, Church of Jesus Christ. Doctrine and Covenants 124. Church Historians Press/JSB Revelations. D&C 124. C. White's interpretation that the time for building the temple had passed by, and both we and our dead were rejected together. Joseph Smith Papers. Letter from Lyman Wight and others. The 15th of February 1844 B. P. 3. Joseph Smith Papers. Council of 50 Minutes note repeating the same point. D. White Journal quotation that the church now stands rejected together with their dead, and alienated from her God. Stir PDF. Polygamy on the Pedernals. Lyman Wight's Mormon Villages in Antebellum, Texas. E. White on succession through Joseph Smith's posterity/fruit of his loins. Stir PDF. Polygamy on the Pedernals. F. White on the final redemption of Zion, and the building of the great temple therein. Stir PDF. Polygamy on the Pedernals. If you want, I can also convert this into a more overtly rhetorical YouTube description version with the same A-F inline markers preserved.